Hello, my name's Gemma. I love bookshops, and so I'll say happy February and happy birthday to me, because as my birthday treat, my partner and I went to Hay-on-Wye to go book shopping. We go roughly every 2 years for my birthday, and it's the best place in the world for a bibliophile. For anyone who doesn't know, Hay-on-Wye is a small town right on the border between England and Wales, and it's considered the first book town in the world. It's got a population of about 2,000 people, but within that it has about 20 bookstores. The number does kind of fluctuate across the years, so we've been 3 times across 6 years, and I've seen a few bookshops come and go. There are a couple new ones this year. It used to have this really eccentric mayor called Richard Booth, who owned a bookstore in town, and he decided in the 70s that he wanted to make it a town of books, and so he really encouraged booksellers, particularly second-hand booksellers, to set up shop in Hay. And some of them are quite specialist, like they're very focused on things like natural history. There used to be a specialist sci-fi bookshop. One is more actually focused on maps, but that includes books about maps. And there's a specialist store that's still in place that is one of my favourites, because it's about crime stories, murder mysteries, true crime, anything related to that. It's called Murder and Mayhem, and you'll see later on. And some are just general second-hand. Hay is also quite well known internationally as the site of the Hay-on-Wye Literary Festival. Every year it runs in late May, early June. It's been running since the 80s. And this small town of 2,000 people swells to sort of about 80,000 visitors over the 10 days of the festival. I've never actually been to the festival. I would love to go one year, but for now I'm happy visiting the town. It is quite dreary, grey and wet every time we visit, because it's early February in Wales, but it doesn't matter what the weather is like as long as the bookstores are open. So we actually started off our trip by going to the castle. That's been closed the last couple of times we visited because it's undergone this major renovation. So now it is really cool, all beautifully kind of balanced between modern bits and old bits. On the top floor there is the desk and working papers and various bits and bobs that belonged to Richard Booth when he was mayor, and I think he crowned himself king at one point. Yeah, he was quite a weird fellow. But yeah, it was really cool to look in the drawers of the desk and see all his papers and memorabilia to do with him, and his international visitors, and all the records about how Hay became known for his bookshops. I think he might have tried to set Hay up as an independent kingdom as well. I don't know a lot about it, but they had like crown jewels on display, which are made from just bits of tinfoil basically, and costume jewellery, and they had a Hay passport, and I mean, it's all probably, a publicity stunt, but, it adds a bit of character to the area. We also went to a couple of non-bookshop related places on the first day. So we went to the stationery store where there's all sorts of beautiful, expensive fountain pens and equipment and ink. Bought an escape room in an envelope kind of game there to play back at the cottage later on, and a couple of bits and pieces of gifts. You can also, for some reason, buy a lot of Tintin stuff in the stationery store. Yeah, it's just full of beautiful, cute things. Then we started going to the actual bookstores themselves, so I think I went to about 14 around the town. Started off with what's called the Cinema bookshop, It is in an old, very, very old cinema, multiplex. It's huge. I'm pretty sure it's the biggest in town. I don't find it has the best quality just because it is so chock-a-block with very old, out of fashion titles. But the advantage it does have is that it sells a lot of Remainer books, so when there's been too much printed, so you can get some good new titles, but also newer editions of old titles. So I picked up a copy of The Maltese Falcon from here, for example. Also a lot of folio books, as you would expect in any second-hand bookstore in the UK. It also has a huge amount of vintage old science fiction magazines, the kind of anthology magazines, which really was how sci-fi got started and became as accessible as it is. Then on that same day I went to one of my favourite stores in town, which is called Addyman's Annex. So there are two Addyman stores, the main store which I went to the next day, but went to the Annex first. I just can find some real hidden gems in this store. I don't know how they distinguish what goes into which shop, but there's one room which is usually remainders and quite modern fiction, and then the rest of the rooms tend to be more second-hand stuff. And all of these bookshops are usually very higgledy-piggledy, everything crammed together, squished into weird architecture, sometimes deliberately weird, because in Addyman's they have an old Eastern European Orthodox chapel that they moved across the continent and set up as one of the rooms within. Although now I think about it, I think the Orthodox chapel is in the main Addyman's, not the Annex. I might be getting my clips and my memory mixed up. Then I ditched Chris and left him at the little cosy apartment we were staying at and went around the bookshops by myself. I went to Murder and Mayhem, first of all, one of my favourites, specialist crime store, cozy crime, true crime, Agatha Christie's, Golden Age classics, non-fiction, all sorts, basically everything to do with that kind of general subject. Also, weird mannequin ladies. Quite a few of the bookstores, as their little unique quirky points, have decorations or dioramas or just strange architectural bits, just to make them a bit more interesting. Then I went to Booths, which is, the original. And I always head straight downstairs into the basement level because that's where they have not only crime but also sci-fi and graphic novels and fantasy, basically all the genres I'm interested in. Of course, Sod's Law, I found a folio edition of The Maltese Falcon, the book I just bought the day before. Now I find a nice folio edition of it. It was £15 though, so I'm not sure I would have bought it even if I didn't know that there was a £5 copy just down the road in a different bookstore. There is probably some way to figure out what's the optimum order to visit the bookstores in for the different genres or authors that you're interested in, but I certainly haven't figured that out, as we'll see later on. And then, as with the cinema bookshop, their shelves are quite clogged with just old stock that I visited 3 times now, and I don't feel that there's a lot of stock rotation in some of the genres. It's just old, unpopular titles. It looks good. They have very full shelves, although honestly, particularly in the sci-fi and crime sections of booths, I feel like each bookcase is, say, about 6 or 7 shelves, but they're generally only half full. Like the top 3 or 4 will be full, and then it's all empty, sort of from knee height downwards. There were a couple of new bookstores in Hay this time we visited, including one called, I think it was called North Street Books, which was no second-hand books at all, just new books. And then I was so disappointed. One of the new shops is called Hay-on-Wye, and it's a queer bookstore, and it was closed, only open on weekends, and we were there Tuesday to Thursday. However, I was pleased to find a little second-hand section, which is for the Hay-on-Wye books, but it's in one of the other bookstores that is open more days of the week. So I'm guessing the main shop is just new, and they had this little single bookcase in the other store for their second-hand stuff. There was also a new shop, well, I think it was new, I don't think I've seen it before, called the Literary Lab, which is very focused on children's books and books about wellness, like mindfulness, physical health, mental health, the whole shebang. A lot of sort of journaling books, but also then products like organic soap, beautiful things. Then in Hay-on-Wye booksellers, they have a room specifically for science fiction. I'm not even sure there's any fantasy in here, but maybe I'm wrong, but I did find some E&M Banks here, which is one of the few places that I found. And then the final bookstore I visited was, of course, the one that had the Cadfael books I was looking for. I had already bought maybe 4 of the titles already at Murder and Mayhem for £5 each, and then of course I go to Hay-on-Wye booksellers, and they were there for £2.50 each. Of course, sod's law. I visited the bookshops in the wrong order. And the thing with, making Hay-on-Wye a book town is they do have bookstores just tucked away in little random places, like an alley. There's a couple of open air bookcases on the grounds of the castle, which is just based on an honesty payment system. So after 2 days of shopping, it's probably time to show you what I bought. Dancing by the Light of the Moon, compiled by Giles Brandreth. This is a collection of poetry. Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a classic sci-fi. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This is kind of a novelization of a true crime incident. They Came to Baghdad by Agatha Christie. Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. This is a kind of heist story. The Sinking Admiral by the members of the Detection Club. This is a collectively written book. I did ask if they had a copy of The Floating Admiral, which is the more famous in this kind of collection. They only had 1 copy, and apparently had only ever had 1 copy, despite there being modern reprints. They only had a first edition, and it was £350. So I was like, no, thank you very much, but that's out of my budget. This was £6.95. The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. A Grim Dark, so we'll see how I get on with that. I'm a bit hit and miss when it comes to Grim Darks. The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. And of course, I bought this yesterday, and then today I found a nice Folio Society edition in a different bookstore. This is a classic gumshoe detective mystery kind of crime story. Ripley Underground by Patricia Highsmith, the second in the Ripley series. 3 Moments of an Explosion by China Miéville. I've never actually heard their surname said, so I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but this is a collection of short stories. The Con Artists by Luke Healy. This is the only graphic novel I was able to find in any of the shops that wasn't either a graphic memoir or like superhero kind of story. I think it's just a fiction story about 2 friends, one of whom might be a con artist. I don't know, we'll have to read it and find out. The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. This is a retelling of the Iliad from the perspective of the women involved. The Player of Games and Matter, both by Ian M. Banks. These are within the Culture series. This is the 2nd book in the series. This is much further on, but I'm only part way through the 1st, so I don't mind buying one that's a bit further on. I'll get to it eventually. I also bought The Algebraist, thinking it was part of the Culture series, but it's not. It's a separate universe, standalone. That's fine. This Is How You Lose the Time War by Gladstone and El Motar. A time travel romance, I believe. Then I bought 4 of the Brother Cadfael series. These are the 4 I was missing from my collection, so great to fill in some gaps. They are The Summer of the Danes, The Potter's Field, Brother Cadfael's Penance. They're from the main series, and then one companion book called A Rare Benedictine. I also bought this, even though it's which is not a book, but I'll include it anyway. It's from a company called Instead of a Card, and it's 10 poems about cats. I don't know if I'll give this as a gift to someone instead of using a card, or if I'll just keep hold of it myself, but there was a whole variety of like different themes. So like 10 poems about mountains, 10 poems about tea, which I did consider buying, 10 poems about, you know, this, that and the other, but of course I had to get the one about cats. And then finally my only 2 brand new full price purchases, because everything else was either second hand or where it was like a new book like this. It was a Remainer, I think they're called, a remainder, can't remember the terminology, but basically too many were printed, and so they have the overstock and they're selling it for a reduced price. But Richard Booth's, I bought Death on the Lusitania by R.L. Graham. And then the strangest one I found, well, strange in a particular way, was Death of a Bookseller by Alice Slater. It's strange because this is the Christmas edition of the book, but as far as I could find, the text inside is the same as every other copy of Death of a Bookseller. So it's not like The Appeal and then the Christmas Appeal, where they're 2 separate stories. This is the same story as the one that has a bright neon green cover. There's also a bright pink cover, which I also saw in a different shop, which I think is like a Waterstones exclusive version or something like that. But this is the Christmas version. But according to the bookseller at Richard Booth's, it's the same actual book inside. So I assume the bright neon green version is still, the events are still happening at Christmas. And so they did a Christmas edition, which I've never seen before, but yeah. I didn't know that was a thing, like just if a book's set at Christmas, having a standard edition and then a Christmas edition. So how many books is that? That is, if we include 10 poems about cats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 23. Now I've got to add all of these to my story graph, and I will also just double check how much I've spent. I was given a £20 Hay-on-Wye voucher by a friend, but so that would have helped with the costings, but let's add it up and see how much these all came to. It's very dangerous when individually they're only a few pounds. Okay, all updated, and total comes to £128 and 9 pence. I think I added them all up correctly. When it was just the second-hand books and remainers, it was under £100, but the 2 new books drastically increased that. This is the most expensive, it's £16.99, so it better be good. taking a bit of a risk because I think this is a debut. I will admit it was a bit of a cover buy. This is a beautiful book, and it does say perfect for lovers of Agatha Christie, so it should be perfect for me, but they say that all the time about any kind of murder mystery that isn't too grim and horrible. So 128.09 divided by 23, so an average of £5.56 per book, which is pretty good. So the cheapest was £2 and the most expensive was 17. So here's a little addendum to my previous haul back in the holiday cottage. Home now, obviously. We did end up going to the New Strand bookstore, just a bit outside of Hay. It was a real higgledy-piggledy old labyrinth. They've got 30,000 books there apparently, and I think most of them are in a back room in stacks, unstable stacks of books, and a labyrinth of bookcases. We couldn't figure out how to turn on the lights, so we were just going around using the torches on our phones as flashlights. And there were kind of categories, but not, it wasn't a neat, tidy bookstore like most of the ones in Hay. But I did find a few more worthwhile books. Got Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, a classic kind of story about a posh English family. This looked really cute. It's called Search for the Golden Acorn, and it's a armchair puzzle book, but I think used to involve going around National Trust estates and solving this puzzle kind of in real life. Published in 1995. I doubt that the Golden Acorn is available as a prize anymore, but it's kind of along the same lines as Masquerade. Then they had a science fiction section, which was full of the pulp fiction books that a lot of the other bookstores are full of as well, but this had a couple of Asimovs. So I got Earth is Room Enough, which I believe is a collection of short stories, and then I also picked up Foundation and Empire. However, I made the mistake of getting the wrong book in the Foundation trilogy. So this bookstore is so in the middle of nowhere that there's no cell phone reception, so I couldn't check Storygraph, but I knew that I needed the third book in the Foundation series, and they had a book there called Second Foundation, and then they had Foundation and Empire. Unfortunately I couldn't remember the name of the second book they already owned, but I knew I needed the third one, so I was like, oh, Second Foundation must be the second book and Foundation and Empire must be the third. And I went ahead and bought it, and really I should have just read the blurb on the back. This is the second volume in Asimov's world-famous trilogy, one of the great classics of science fiction. So I bought a duplicate and left behind the one I actually needed. Oh well. I'm sure I'll find another copy somewhere. It's not like there's a shortage of them. So many of the bookstores in Hay, the science fiction sections in particular, are just chocker full of these. When were they published? In the 70s? This style of book. I don't know if it technically is pulp fiction, but it's how I think of it. 1960 and reprinted in 1973. Yeah, so that's right. It is disappointing going to these stores and seeing very few new science fiction and fantasy as well. The shelves are just clogged full of these small kind of Panther editions, and some of them are, you know, are great. You know, I've got a few Asimovs and a few Ursula K. Le Guins in this style, but there's definitely certain authors that have just completely gone out of fashion, and I don't know what the stock turnover is like in these stores, but it certainly seems that that's all they have is science fiction from the 60s and 70s and nothing more recent, which is a pity. And then I also got 4 green penguins. So the green ones are the murder mystery style books. So I got 2 Agatha Christie's, Murder on the Orient Express and The Mystery of the Blue Train. One's Arthur Conan Doyle, so the case book of Sherlock Holmes. and one that I've never read from this author before, Josephine Tey, but I've heard good things. I think she's often recommended as, if you like Christine, you want one of her contemporaries, Josephine Tey, is who to go with. So I got The Daughter of Time, which sounds like a sci-fi title, but it's green, so must be murder mystery. Now we're back home. There were some books waiting for me in the post, so I don't really kind of consider them part of this shopping trip, but they just happened to arrive at about this time. So we've got Ian M. Banks, The Culture. So these are his drawings from when he was writing the Culture series. So they're all the like little sketches of all the ships and all the locations, and I don't think there's any people. It's more like the kind of world building and plotting it all out, and little sketches he did. So this is like a coffee table book style, but it'll be useful as a reference when reading my way through the series. And then my graphic novel subscription arrived. The theme this month is Love and Lunar New Year. So we've got The Faint of Heart and Lunar New Year Love Story. These are apparently both YA. This is kind of magical realism, and I think this is much more fantastical. We'll see how those go. And then finally, I ordered the deluxe collector's edition of The Lives of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a cloth bound book with a beautiful design stenciled and stamped on it. There's also gorgeous end papers, reminiscent of Venice, sprayed edge and all that kind of thing. I think this is the first and only book I own where I actually own 3 copies of it, because I've got the American edition that I bought way back when, I've got the 10th anniversary edition, and now this one as well. And I know it might seem a bit silly because, well, only 3 copies of any one book is silly to begin with, but also this book has been written so slowly, and there's definitely questions around whether it's ever going to be finished, because I think there's a plan for 8 books and 3 have been published. The last one was in 2013, I believe. So we're going on 11 years since one was published. We are due some novellas, and there was an announcement earlier this week saying that the 4th book is mostly written, final draft, in production. I don't know, can't quite remember, but it's sort of on the horizon, but maybe next year or the year after. Which is fine, I don't mind waiting, but it does feel like that they keep publishing these newer editions of the same book, which is originally written in 2006. It's like, are they just trying to keep the money coming in to keep the publishing of this story afloat? I think they are also releasing a new paperback cover that might just be in America, I don't know. I won't be buying that though, although it is really, really pretty. So anyway, this is, you know, one of my favourite series. I love this book, so I kind of half don't mind that I keep buying copies, but half think that they're just milking the series and the fans to try and financially keep things afloat. But as long as we get the rest of the books eventually. I do wonder if he'll try and shorten the series, if the plan was originally for 8. I feel like it was 8. It was quite a few anyway. Maybe the author will try and kind of condense some storylines together, because if each of the successor books takes 10 years to write, you can't have 2036, 2046, 2056, 2066. That would be stretching people's lifetimes. But what do I know? I'm not an author. I don't know the creative process. Right. Well, it all fits, so we know the capacity of my book cart, bookshelves, and this bookcase is about 300. Good to know. I read The Con Artist last night. It's a graphic novel, so it was a quick read, and that's now going downstairs into the red graphic novels section. Thanks for joining me on this little shopping trip to Hay-on-Wye, or not so little if you consider 31 books a pretty substantial shopping trip. That will keep me going for a fair few months, or add some months onto the end of my TBR timeline. They'll all get read eventually, don't worry about it. Thanks very much, bye.